Hi, this is Leland Taylor with Brand Buddy, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Michael Cohen. He's a distinguished attorney specializing in healthcare and life sciences law. His work ranges from a wide range of healthcare related businesses, specializing with physician practices, medical device manufacturers, medical spas, mobile medical apps, and even had the chance to work with me when I was an aspiring supplement seller working with structure function claims and really making sure I had the right understanding of the FDA and how to really market and sell accurately and legally my omega-3s. He has extensive background working as an assistant professor at the Harvard Medical School and an adjunct assistant professor at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Author of 6 leading books on healthcare law. You've really established yourself as a thought leader. So thank you so much for coming in to talk about legal strategies for emerging health and wellness. To begin, I'd love to ask a few questions to get to know you better. First of all, what exactly do you do in your own words, and really what drives your work, Michael?
Great. Thanks, Leland. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for reconnecting. So, what I do is healthcare and FDA law, and that's what our law firm does, Cohen Healthcare Law Group. And basically, it's the whole gamut of health and wellness, which is huge because everybody wants to live longer, everybody wants to be healthier, and health isn't any longer something that happens when you go to a doctor's office. It's on your watch, it's going to be in your glasses, it's in the air, it's on the internet. So everything really includes some aspect of health and wellness, and it's highly regulated. It's not like making what they used to say in the old days, widgets, I guess, was the old flashbacks to college economics, right? But these days, they're more likely to be digital widgets, I guess, digits or whatever they're called, or quantum digits. We're in some like alternate reality here where things are getting weirder and weirder, and we're accelerating. And so anything that touches on health and wellness, there is a legal component, and it gets extremely granular, and that's what we deal with. It's almost like speaking a foreign language because the rules are old and the technologies are new. And so making the translation is what I do and what my firm does in the healthcare space.
Excellent. And in terms of really your initial inspiration back when we were calling things widgets, what got you inspired to specialize in healthcare or life sciences law?
So what happened was when I got out of law school, I had a couple of additional experiences. I clerked for a federal judge, and excuse me, and you'll edit that out, right? That cough, that's a good thing. The frog. So when I got out of law school, I clerked for a federal judge, and I was in court every single day. And I decided that I did not want to be a courtroom lawyer. It's lots of fun to watch on TV, but it just wasn't for me. I liked interpreting cases. I liked giving advice. And so I went more to the corporate arena. I spent 3 years at a large, very large Wall Street law firm, doing M&A, banking, securities, just classic Wall Street law kind of work. Simultaneously, I was doing yoga, I was meditating, I was opening up spiritually. Back then this was all like very woo-woo and very far away. Nowadays, we're both in California, like this is like bread and butter. So, but back then I was trying to integrate these two. And I realized that the interface was health and wellness, that I would apply myself to be a lawyer and figure out how this world of health, wellness, everything from the most technological, biological, chemical, to the mind, body, psychological, environmental, and spiritual, what the whole gamut is of health. And then how the law constrains or facilitates an environment where people can really take charge of their own destiny, really. And also how products and services from companies can shape that and how the law constrains or expands those opportunities. So that's how I went from being a corporate lawyer to a lawyer specializing in the healthcare arena.
Very cool. Okay. And so as you developed your career, do you have a particular notable success story you like or a client case study that can help us drive home really how you help brands or what you've worked with that you've been proud of?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of them. There are lots and lots of companies that I've worked with that started very small, like in the garage, in the dining room. I remember one client, so he started a telemedicine company. And of course, these days, telemedicine's a no-brainer because Obviously we're talking remotely. So, and we've
Right.
been through COVID, but back then, it was a sensation like, oh, what's this thing? Sounds like TV. And then there's medicine, which sounds like a white coat,
Hmm.
So how do these two come together? There are lots and lots of challenges. Um, how do you prescribe? Can you prescribe across states?
Right.
Do you have to see somebody in person? What if it involves controlled substances for weight loss or something like that? Are there special rules? Are there federal rules? You have to deal with the laws of every single state if you have a national brand where patients are located in different states.
Right.
And are there limitations on what kind of conditions you can treat? So all these questions really had to be worked through painstakingly back then. And so literally, I met this entrepreneur and the physician with whom he was going to work with in I wasn't exactly a bar because, but I remember that it was a restaurant. There were like peanut shells on the floor, very crunchy. Everyone, wore a t-shirt, and that's how he started. And today, tens of millions of dollars once he got through those initial hurdles. So really, by investing in the foundational legal advice, he was able to get what he needed to grow his business, stay
Yeah.
compliant, and avoid risk.
Yeah. And so in that regard, what are some of those common misconceptions that people have when they're thinking about healthcare law, regulation, where do they get lost there?
Yeah. The misconceptions are, so one of them is I don't need legal advice at the beginning. Like I'm just gonna break it and fix it, which is okay if it's a business model because you can then reiterate your business model and you can do trials and then you can continuously refine. But if you break it and the sheriff doesn't like it, then the law has taken notice.
Mhm.
So break it and fix it doesn't work. You want to have your legal team with you at the beginning.
At the front.
And I even represented one client. So this client had literally invested $2 million
Mhm.
in the development of product and the marketing, but had never gotten healthcare legal advice. She
Mhm.
had a business lawyer. She incorporated.
Right.
She had all her paperwork done, but there was one very simple FTC, Federal Trade Commission decision, which basically said this technology is disallowed
Mhm.
and you cannot make these claims. And it was a total red flag. And it would have been better to find that out investing a modicum of money at the outset on legal advice than hundreds of thousands of dollars on marketing, branding, website, sales, team, operations, the whole business plan. So the common misconception is I don't need help yet. And the
Right.
reality is it's better to have the strategic input ahead of time so you can really factor that into your vision and make modifications.
Got it. And so that seems like definitely a pretty common one. Are there other more kind of the most frequent mistakes businesses make when they're navigating healthcare compliance, outside of not coming in at the ground floor and really planning and taking that strategic consultant perspective into how they, market and sell their products? Are there other kind of frequent mistakes you can highlight here for our audience?
Yeah, I think one thing is if you're a lawyer, you're trained to spot risk.
Right.
You're it's a little bit hard because you're always saying, what's the worst that can happen, right? I mean,
That's what you're paid to
right?
do. Mhm.
That's what you're paid to do. Your entrepreneurial side is saying, what's the best that can happen for the client and how can this thing grow? So there is strategy.
Yeah.
There's also this risk management side that's constantly in the background. It's kind of bred in from day one of law school. And in
Right.
law school, we call that issue spotting. So
Mm.
you're literally trained to see what could happen, and where could you get hit collaterally? What's the side hit that you're not expecting?
Right.
And so that's a misconception that you can see everything that's coming down the pike because you can't. You know, you can only see what you can see with your training. It's just like any kind of professional training. Any kind of professional training, if the training is to spot risk, to spot issues, what could happen? So to give you an example, one of our clients was a chiropractor, and she came for some issues with her practice. And the things in her practice, it turned out that they were fairly seeable and solvable. But there was one thing she did that she couldn't see that really got her in trouble.
Mm.
She was using a medical device and she advertised in the newspaper that she had this device. And in her ad, all she did was simply repeat the claims that the manufacturer made for the device. So
Right.
she thought she was safe. But it turned out that the district attorney didn't go after the manufacturer, they went after her for these claims. Tens of thousands of dollars to litigate, fight, defend her claims, get the scientific evidence, marshal the briefs. And that was the kind of thing that was unforeseen and unforeseeable.
Mm.
So I happen to be watching now this Dune series on TV,
Oh, great.
and they've got these truth sayers, right? And their job is to kind of be a little bit prophetic and see what is happening and what's coming down the pike and what somebody's really saying. And that's kind of the role, this is what could happen.
Well, and that, as we think to the future, like Dune, or in terms of AI and a lot of the trends in healthcare, what do you see are the legal trends that are now shaping healthcare and life sciences today that are really impacting the future?
Yeah, I mean, obviously AI is huge, right? Because more and more decisions are being made by AI, and AI is supplanting a lot of the creative arts and things like that. I mean, AI can compose a song or, make a poem for you or make things rhyme. And I always thought that was a special talent of mine. I just went to the rhyme thesaurus and I could make things work. But the singularity is near. Some people say the singularity is here. So the trend there in law is really more of it's a clunkier mechanism. It evolves slowly. It isn't explosive. I mean, you wait and wait for one decision from the Supreme Court, and it's retrospective, right? And now the environment has changed.
Mm.
So you have an entrepreneur, you're working with AI, you're working with all these systems, and things are accelerating. And then you have these old laws that can constrain things. And you can't, it's like if you run a red light and there's a camera, it's an automatic violation. So the law doesn't always keep up. And then you need people to interpret the law. So the interpretation is very difficult, is very complex. It's not that who knows how much of our, of what's in our sphere is going to be transferred. I'm not saying that it could never be uh, taken just like all these other areas can, like the creative arts and so on. I mean, that's a huge debate. But the problem is that the arrows are contradictory. So there's a lot of judgment and interpretation. So one rule says this, and then another rule says that, and they're all pointing different ways. And then they all interact in this kind of synergistic fashion. And right now, it takes a lot of judgment and experience to sift through them.
Yeah.
And a lot of that experience is just being a veteran of a lot of battles with these rules.
Well, and it seems like, this leads to, this question of really how have these legal considerations evolved? You talk about old cases, the shift, and the, keeping up with that can be, even as a, I'm sure as a lawyer difficult, but as a startup entrepreneur or a business person, it's well outside of our expertise. And even with AI, I know they give wrong reads of, you really need someone who can see that. But how would you say these considerations have evolved in terms of how the FTC works, how laws are being created, and how the attorney generals influence what gets enforced, what's not? How have you seen this space evolve in the recent past?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to unpack it a little bit. So law is very complex. It's not like there's just the law.
Right.
So you have, for example, you have statutes, and then you have to read, interpret the statute. Then you have regulations, like the medical board might have regulations.
Mm.
FDA might have regulatory law, administrative law that applies to your situation. They might have agency pronouncements, guidelines,
Mm.
policy documents. Then you've got cases from judges that interpret the law. And once they say this is what the law is, that's what it is according to the latest interpretation. But then there might be cases from different jurisdictions that go different ways. And you might have a multi-state model. And then you might have rules that go different ways, or you might have a rule that's very archaic. Let's take corporate practice of medicine. The idea is that corporations can't practice medicine. In a way, it makes sense. You want medicine practiced by a doctor, by somebody that knows you individually. But the fact is, if your watch can tell you if you're about to have a heart attack, the manufacturer in a way is practicing medicine.
Mm. Yeah.
So this old rule that goes back more than a century, it's still there, and the $1 million question is that rule going to apply to you? Is it going to be applied to you? Or is some more rational, enlightened, modern person going to say, hey, that was a great rule and back when we had wagons, but right now look at the market, it's different, and we've got to change things up a little bit? Or are they going to just say, okay, we got you in the crosshairs, we're going to slam you with this penalty, that penalty, you didn't see this, it's like you can't ask for, is it like forgiveness versus permission, right? So it creates a really difficult situation. And the thing is, if you're going to anticipate those risks and give advice, you can't be a curmudgeon. You can't be a naysayer back in the dark ages. You also can't be naive about it. It's a very delicate judgment. And that's where lawyers and clients really work together to kind of titrate the business decision informed by legal advice so you can make the best risk and get the best out to market.
Right.
Everyone's racing at the same time. Nobody wants to get in trouble, but people want to take risks.
Well, and to that point of risk, what are the major risks associated with healthcare startups, and really how do you feel like they can mitigate them?
Well, the major risk is doing something wrong that can crush you at the beginning. It's
Right.
something unanticipated, like let's just say a HIPAA violation.
Mm.
Some piece of data got breached, not from a hacker and attack, but just some sloppiness within the organization.
Mhm.
In the old days, people would carry stuff around, paper charts, and we had a client where it was a nurse and she left the patient's file in the car. She went to church. She left the car unlocked because who's going to steal anything from a car? And all that was in the car of any value was this manila folder. Nothing else was showing. And someone opened it up, took the folder, and now the patient's data got leaked. Now, there's
Mm.
penalties and disclosures. And so you don't want that extra weight when you're just starting out. So it could be light or it could be something crushing. So that's why it's better to anticipate it.
Right.
Or if you go in the wrong direction, and let's just take corporate practice of medicine. Let's say your model is such and the payments flow a certain way and the contracts with the physicians and the relationships, and they create a legal issue like corporate practice or fee splitting, kickback issue. Um, it takes a lot of strategic sense to figure out how all these pieces should optimally work together so as to reduce the legal friction, if you want to put it that way, but also maximize the frictionless, business component.
Got it. And so you mentioned this mistake of not coming at the beginning. It's a common mistake in engaging. Can you elaborate on, how that business would avoid that pitfall, what that experience would be like working with a lawyer like your team to really go into, okay, you're starting a business. If you have a case study like you were giving an example of it, how do they engage at that beginning, and what's a good way to avoid that pitfall? How does that experience work with a lawyer?
So yeah, so we can move, for example, the dietary supplements, which you brought up at the beginning, which we talked about. So this distinction between like you're allowed to make a structure function claim, like how the supplement affects the structure function of your body, like calcium builds healthy bones or relieves occasional bloating, um, helps you fall asleep. You can say those things,
Right.
but you can't make a disease claim. So a disease claim, obviously, you can't say this supplement cures cancer, right? But what about things in the middle? How do you position that? Like this is good for your brain health, or just go back to sleep. Obviously, you can't say insomnia because that's considered a disease category. But if you say helps you fall asleep, which is okay, helps you fall asleep if you have trouble falling asleep, now you've basically said insomnia with these other words, right?
Mhm.
So there's a bit of like, Gandalf, the language magician. And
Mhm.
so you want to make claims that are going to pass muster because if not, the product can be just taken off the shelf if
Right.
it's really bad.
Mhm.
But at the same time, you want to be aggressive in your claims, aggressive enough that you can market your product and be successful. So that's the edge, that's the dance. And that's where it helps to get advice and position yourself.
Excellent. Yeah, and so I guess as we look forward in the world, what do you think we need to see more in terms of healthcare compliance, innovation? How do you see the future evolving in the near term?
Obviously, I think it's a balance, right? And this is the balance that our clients have to weigh because the more compliance, the less good it is for business. The more business, the less compliance.
Right.
So I think I'm kind of like the Aristotelian, avoid the extremes, go in the middle. I think the Greeks probably covered most of the good advice out there.
Mhm.
It's not like I learned in kindergarten. I got it from the Greeks.
I know.
But
I took my Latin and my philosophy, so I can agree with you there. And there's thought then the ancient Greeks had thought through most of what we thought through now. But I guess in terms of when we look at regulatory law, do you feel there are areas that need improvement or reform as we stand today?
yeah, so just to refine that idea, like again, like what law is very reactive. That's the other thing, right? The market's proactive. So what happens is something really bad happens, and then now there's a law so that that really bad thing never happens again.
Right.
And in a way, it's like it can be punitive and retroactive. It constrains all the people coming forward, and it can be too much. That's why I was, joking a little bit about the Greeks, but it's about balance, really. Like you can't go. This is where I sit. Like I'm not, everything's about compliance, and you have to be straitjacketed. That would not be my position. On the other hand, it's not like innovation all the way, and there are no rules, and it's a free for all because regulators are there to protect the public. So you have to balance protecting the public against protecting innovation and moving forward and protecting the greater good in a larger sense by allowing things to flourish. And that's that middle ground that we have to have wisdom.
Yeah.
And we can't just be reactive and be extreme. So that's where I would, yeah, tease it out.
Yeah. And so we take this idea of wisdom and thinking about, what kind of advice for entrepreneurs that are entering it into the healthcare space, supplements, physical products. I summarize a few items. It's definitely coming early to incorporate healthcare law and a legal professional in your vision. But also, do you have, thinking through like this balance or, this idea of the ancient Greeks or middle ground? Any other advice in terms of, how to help this type of entrepreneur think about scaling and succeeding in this space with regulatory environments and shifting winds? Any other insights here for them in terms of how they can succeed better?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I'm gonna modify what I say from the amendment because joke, read the disclaimer. But even though I've said balance, like I think the balance is for regulators in the sense that don't err on the side of fear and looking at like the worst side of what could happen. Because there's a lot of good, there's a lot of upside too. And
Right.
for the entrepreneur, I think the entrepreneur is more risk-minded. So the balance tilts in favor of there's some things that you're not going to do, right? If you have I use the example of green light, yellow light, red light, right? And green light's obvious, red light, you're not going to go through a red light with a camera. But most of the time, the judgment call is what if it's yellow? And this instantaneous thing, I know it happens for me, my body and my brain, like, how close am I to the yellow light? How fast am I going? If I gun it, am I going to make it? Is it going to be safe? Who's in the car with me? You know, it's just this instantaneous risk assessment.
Mm.
I don't drive like a 100-year-old grandmother. You know, on the other hand, I'm not on the Autobahn. So that's, you know, that's where the edge is. And I think the edge is poised toward risk. And I think like going back towards some of these rules that are older and clunkier, like corporate practice in medicine,
Yeah.
some states are lighter, some states are stronger. So you have to know what the legal environment is that you're entering. Some agencies heavier handed. Federal Trade Commission, if you make a false claim, the penalties can be in the millions.
Got it. Well, and that leads to an interesting question, which is really what key regulatory aspects should startups and investors prioritize? And I'll give an example. I have a friend who's starting a company that's a magnesium water, and we did
Yep.
a lot of research on it. We saw there's certain risks related to the stomach and how the people feel. It's also a consumable. They're manufacturing it in Europe, but they're going to sell it in the U.S. And as you start to look at this spectrum, how would you advise, or what would be the key regulatory aspects? And you touched on that, I think, earlier. But what should the startup or the investor prioritize in terms of that regulatory environment or the things to dig into?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest dividing line in health and wellness is to look at products versus services.
Okay.
So your friend would be on the product side. If you have a product, you're most likely under the jurisdiction of the FDA.
Right.
They deal with foods, drugs, cosmetics, dietary supplements, medical devices, biologics, radiation emitting devices.
Yep.
So if you have a product that's FDA, and FDA, depending on where the product is positioned, it's either going to be safety and efficacy, if it's a very risky product or intense on human health, like let's say a pacemaker, right? They're going to look at safety and efficacy. But if it's something that's on the lighter side, like a supplement, let's say, that doesn't have any drug ingredients, let's say it's, like magnesium, calcium, those kinds of things, they're more likely to look at the claims, right? So then it's about this Gandalf language wizardry that the lawyers can provide.
Mhm.
And you have to make sure you don't have any problems on the ingredient side. You can't have contamination. There's good manufacturing practices. There are technical things that have to be, where the boxes have to be ticked. But in terms of the regulatory things that an entrepreneur is going to look at, once you do those, it's going to be the claims, the languaging, your marketing. How aggressive are the claims? Do they push
Mm.
the edge or do they cross the line?
Yeah.
When you're dealing with services, then you're more into corporate practice of medicine and a kickback, fee splitting, all of those issues. Um,
Hmm. So I have a fun question here. If you had to give a healthcare startup, three essential tips for success, what
yeah.
would?
Um, Three essential tips for success would be get an attorney early, like we said earlier, right? And keep them in the loop
Right.
and have everything reviewed.
Hmm. Have everything reviewed.
And
And
just remember that your company keeps growing, right? So first you're a startup, then you have vendors, then you have alliances, then eventually you're gonna want to talk to potential strategic partners and get bought like that. There's ample opportunity for legal input every step of the way.
right. And I've had a great experience working with you, with your team, multiple products. When you're advising the market and prospective buyers, what are some of those green flags for businesses that they should watch for when hiring a legal counsel in the healthcare space?
You should look for somebody who's experienced with that kind of thing that you're doing. And we have broad range of experience. We have over 500 clients a year. So you want a lawyer who's very experienced in the space and also has a good general grasp of the health and wellness area, because there's so many different kinds of issues that come in. Like you can't just be a HIPAA lawyer, right? You can't just have like one little narrow sub. It's not like uh, brain surgery or um, I don't know, neuro roboscapulas, whatever. You have to know something about as much as possible in the health and wellness arena. And the other thing is they have to really be a healthcare lawyer. I
Right.
mean, there are lawyers who've had one or two clients that do something with health, and suddenly they're a healthcare lawyer. And it would be like me saying on my resume that I speak French. I mean, a terrible accent. I can do a little British accent from time to time, but I can't claim the language. So people really have to have the experience and the know-how
Hmm.
because it's going to get granular quickly.
Right. Yeah. In conclusion, are there any additional messages you really want to share to the audience about navigating healthcare law? We have a lot of great advice here in terms of, coming in early, thinking about the pitfalls, the different regulatory environments, but anything just in summary here to how to best navigate the healthcare law space.
I mean, I would just say this, people see lawyers and see law as kind of like this sort of thing that they have to do, like going to the dentist and kind of constrained and, I have to pay attention to that. And my God, what if this happens? But the reality is, in order to really enjoy your life as a professional, you have to have a tremendous zeal for what you do.
Right.
You have to have an enthusiasm and excitement about it. So, I mean, I'm very excited because, ultimately, to me, this is about humanity evolving.
Right.
And
That's-
that's why we're in this, right? We're all in this together.
Mhm.
And so my advice is just keep that enthusiasm. You kind of have your strategic partner and your professionals, your attorney, your accountant, your marketing person. And I think that's the spirit, I'd say go for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael. Thanks again for your time, for sharing your insights here on healthcare law and compliance. your expertise in regulatory matters, corporate structures, legal strategies, invaluable really to anyone navigating this space. I've had a wonderful experience over the many years we've worked together. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Stay connected for more conversations with industry leaders. And we really look forward to future conversations. If you'd like to get in touch with Michael, we'll have his email. It's info@cohenhealthcarelaw.com, as well as a link to a bunch of resources. You mentioned there's a great blog you have. If there's anything you want to add in here just about what's in there, we'll put a link to the blog. But Michael, again, would love to know, what they can find there to learn more about you and about your area of expertise here.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. We've covered a lot of topics. We have videos, we have articles, we've got lots of good stuff. So just dive in and have at it.
Great. And if they wanted to work with you, they can just reach out by email and they'll get on a conversation. Is that the simplest way to move forward with you?
Yeah, they'll get on with someone from our firm. That person might even pass the Turing test. I'm just giving you a hint.
There you go. Excellent. Well, thank you, Michael. It's been such a pleasure. We'll leave it here and until the next time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Leland.